So I'm presenting the first session just to talk about accessible publishing, what it is, and how you can get there. So what is accessibility? And I found two definitions. The first one was it is the design of products, services, and devices and environments for people who experience disabilities. It's important to know it's products, services, and devices, as in most of us here are making publications. So that's a product. We are providing a service, an information service. I think there's at least one architect in the room, so I suppose the environments does apply to at least one person in this room, but otherwise, this is really our job for most of us. And there's another definition which I saw, which appealed to me, which is accessibility is the ability to access and benefit from something. So accessibility to a building or a room is the ability to enter the building and benefit from the resources in there, physical accessibility, and similar things apply to books, services, information that we're providing. This talks about disability, and I've been trying to figure out, trying to find definition, and I found a very good one from the WHO that talks about disability umbrella term, term covering impairments, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. An impairment is a problem in a body function or structure. An activity limitation is a difficulty encountered by an individual executing a task. So if somebody's trying to read information and they can't, or participation restriction is a problem experienced by an individual in involvement of life situations. So that's a disability. So accessibility is aimed at people with a disability. So before I go into just look at a little bit about history of accessibility and disability. Historically, and as I was preparing for this presentation, I actually ended up reading way more books than I thought I would. And one of them was around history of accessibility and disabilities. And not so long ago, I'm talking 300-400 years ago, disability was kind of seen as something that was deserved, that God gave you that, or it was a demon or a deity. And and that belief, unfortunately, is still held by some people. Until relatively recently, I'm talking the 1970s, so disability was seen as a deviation from a statistical norm. There's an ideal human being, and disability was the the kind of separation from that. This kind of led to some very strange thought when you kind of take that line of thought further. It's an undesirable trait, so it led to things like eugenics, where people with disabilities or people who are prone to have disabilities, sterilized or institutionalized, or in some cases, killed. So this is not always I suppose, a wonderful background, but in the 1970s, there was a very substantial change on how disability is looked at as a medical issue, and how it's approached in terms of accessibility. Initially, physical accessibility, like being able to get into buildings, being able to use buses, trains, things like that. So that kind of leads me to history of accessible publishing. So that's actually a bit more nicer history, I suppose, if I can put it that way. We can kind of keep going back. There is lots of information, but I decided to start around kind of the 1800s in the modern publishing world, I suppose. So Braille, I'm sure everybody here knows what Braille is. It was developed in 1824, published in 1829 by Louis Braille. Actually, it was based on a system that was originally of the French military called night writing. Napoleon wanted a system where his soldiers could read messages without light at night and without having to speak. And the night writing system was developed for that. It actually totally failed in that approach. But Louis Braille actually found out about that and expanded on it. Now, one of the challenges for the Braille system was, it was long thought at the time, the belief was having a different writing system for people who are visually impaired was not ideal, because it would separate blind people from the people who are not blind, but also the teachers had to learn something new, which was difficult. So the tactile reading or having a different alphabet wasn't considered optimal. About the same time Louis Braille was developing Braille, the New England School for the Blind was founded in Boston, Massachusetts in 1829. So it's actually it was originally called the New England Asylum for the Blind, but it changed to the New England School for the Blind, and then now it's called the Perkins School for the Blind. And they actually developed a tactile system to, of writing as well. It was called Boston Linetype. It used, and it was founded at the school, and it used embossed simplified Roman alphabet. So you can't, I'm not sure if you can see that, but when you can actually see the slide back, you can actually read. It is comprehensible for somebody who's not visually impaired. As in, the letter forms are very close to Roman letter forms. So while this was happening in New York, just down the road now, but a bit more then, they also developed a system called a point. So it was a hold on, excuse me. New York Point, and it was definitely a different coding system or different character system than the Boston Linetype. It actually used dots, so very similar to Braille, and it used a little machine called a Keylogger, which you used to produce it without having to use a stylus, so it was much easier to produce. And they used this in the US well into the 1800s and sometimes the 1900s. And if anybody here knows the Little House books, Little House on the Prairie books, Laura Ingalls Wilder, her sister was actually taught this system. And that's what that looks like, and it looks very, very different. So time continues on. In 1856, there was a school in Texas, in the very much the Wild West, called the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired that opened. They actually didn't have their own writing system. They originally used the New York system, and then they adopted Braille. About the same time on this side of the pond, the RNIB, or what is now the RNIB, was founded. It was the British Foreign Blind Association for improving the embossing literature of the blind. That was the original name. It was a bit of a handful. The meeting was held in London. There were 4 people who had the original meeting for the original association. They renamed and rebranded a few times. Amazing read if you go to their website on their journey. So they were very much big proponents of Braille. So in 1870, RNIB format for the blind in the UK. So the original Braille used the French alphabet. The English alphabet was adopted. They actually developed an Arabic code in 1889. And in 1893, they actually had a dictionary of Braille. So Braille has been kind of quite strong in the UK for a long time. But talking of the UK, I can't really leave one out, which is Moon. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the Moon code. So this is Dr. William Moon, born in Kent, which is, I think, that way if I got my directions right. So it was developed and published around 1843, 1845 period. It's actually based on, again, a tactile format, but it uses a simplified kind of a Roman character set. It's still used in the UK. You can actually go to the RNIB or Vision Australia or Canada and actually borrow books in Moon. It is actually thought to be a better system for teaching, helping people read who have lost sight later in their life, so they don't have to learn new alphabet, or people who are movement impaired. So this system is still used, not widely used, but it is used. But both Braille and Moon have kind of declined in the last, I suppose, 20, 30 years with the advent of DAISY and more kind of technology sophisticated formats. That's the Moon system, by the way. You can see it's, it's relatively kind of simplified form. So, what is What is accessible publishing? Accessibility enables everyone, regardless of disability or special needs, to read, hear, and interact with content. For us, I think that is the challenge, and that's the target. The goal of accessibility is to create an inclusive society for people with visual, auditory, physical, and cognitive disabilities. So when we are creating our products, we should be thinking of not just the able-bodied or the able reader, but also the disabled reader who can access that. So when you are, we speak to our customers, we speak at a lot of conferences, and actually this is a discussion I had about maybe 6 weeks ago with a very large group of publishers, and they said, I've just realized our country has adopted this new treaty called Marrakesh Treaty, which you'll find out about in a minute. We have a legal requirement to make our content accessible, and this is what we do, so what can we do at the end to make it all accessible? And we said, well, that's not really going to work very well. You have to kind of start at the beginning. And we'll go through this as we're going throughout the day, but accessibility, you need to start thinking about accessibility right at the start of the process, not just the publishing process, but the commissioning process. Otherwise, right at the end, there's not much you can do. It's a bit like saying, I baked a cake, there's somebody with a nut allergy in the room, what can I do to the cake to take the nuts out of it? That's really not going to work. If somebody's got a nut allergy, you need to actually think about them before you make the cake. So, who needs accessibility? There are people who are visually impaired, so it's not just blind, it's partially blind or low vision, colorblind, people who have photosensitive seizures, people who are deaf or hearing impairments. There are physical disabilities, paralysis, kind of movement impaired issues, and cognitive impairments. So being able to understand what's being read, even though they might not have visual disability or auditory disability and so on. And some people will have multiple, so they might be deaf-blind. So giving somebody a screen reader who is deaf-blind is not really going to help a lot because they won't be able to hear what's going on. So with those people, why would you want to make accessible content? So I'll try my best at justification. Almost everybody in this room, and everybody you would have met, would be at least temporarily or permanently impaired at some point in their life. It could be that you break your leg and you're in a cast and you can't walk for a few months. It could be that as you age, you lose your sight or you lose your movement, or it could be something else. But 10% of the world's population today, 650 million people, live with some form of disability. And to put that in context, the population of the EU is 508 million people. So more people than who live in the EU live with some form of disability. About 253 million of these people live with a vision impairment. Now, it could be a mild vision impairment, they could be totally blind. And the total of that, you see the number there, 36 million are totally blind. 80% of people who are blind or have moderate severe impairment are over the age of 50. But more than that, between now, or 2015 and 2030, number of old people over 60, will grow in the world to be 56% of the population. Go by 56% to be 901 million. Again, at the bottom end, 1.4 billion on the top end. That's the size of China. Now, by 2030, you're talking about, if you're not having accessible product, it's like not publishing to a group the size of China, the Chinese population. By 2030, the older persons, so people over 60, will outnumber the 0 to 9 age bracket. And by 2050, they will outnumber the 10 to 24. So this is a segment that you need to focus on. Let's ignore ethics for a minute. This is a huge market. It's a huge market of people who lived and earn money and who have now money to spend, who are used to having access to information. Let's bring in ethics back again. We are thinking about ignoring a significant chunk of the world's population if you don't publish, if you don't make this content available. About 90% of the material that's published today cannot be accessed by people who are visually impaired, according to the World Blind Union. So our goal as publishers should be to actually have that down significantly, because think about it, we will be in that age bracket by 2030. I think everybody in this room would be in that age bracket. And imagine only having 10% access to 10% of the information you have access to right now by that time. So you are setting yourself up by doing this. Of course, all of that aside, there are some regulatory requirements. Money doesn't matter, ethics doesn't matter. Well, the law should probably. So the regulatory requirements, as in there's one part here, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities. It's a convention, so it isn't law per se or legislation in a country, but it is around promoting accessibility. And one of the points I want to kind of highlight here is develop it at a minimum cost. So it is not asking you to go and kind of send your publishing operation bankrupt, but you should be looking at accessibility if you can do it at a reasonable cost. So if you look at the convention, there are 173 signatories to it, so almost every country in the world have signed it, and ratified it. And there's an optional protocol at the back of that, a complaints mechanism that has also been signed and ratified by 92 countries, so about half the countries in the world have ratified a mechanism for actually actioning complaints under this treaty. But looking a bit further, there's actual legislation. I'm not going to go too much into this because there's a session later talking about this. There is national legislation in definitely all the parts of the world we operate in, and these are some of it, that talk about accessibility. So in Australia, it's the Disability Discrimination Act. In the UK, it's the Equality Act. In the US, there's a few of these. There's the American Disabilities Act, there's Section 508, which is a standard and a piece of legislation, which is interesting. In Europe, there was originally a European Accessibility Act that was proposed in 2012. I don't think it went through, but there's a Marrakesh Treaty that is actually has 88 signatories and 37 countries have ratified it, and including the European Union. So what all this means, my colleague Emil will talk about later, but there is definitely some legal requirements. If you don't like the ethics and the money, there's definitely the law. So for all of that, what are the key, how do you make something accessible? What do you need to do? So the most important thing is consistent and coherent writing. So last year, starting about April last year until about a month ago, I read a lot. I normally read about probably 30, 40, 50 books a year because I fly a lot, as most of you know. And in a plane, you have to read, otherwise you go mad. So last year, I decided I'm going to stop reading on my Kindle, and I'm going to start using a screen reader on my phone to actually have books read to me, to actually see what it was like. Because I could do that while I was walking or jogging or doing something else. And the biggest problem I had, and this is, there were well-edited books, and sometimes you buy a $2 book from Amazon or a 99-cent book from the Amazon. It's not, I wouldn't really call it coherent and consistent writing in some of them. And especially if you have something like a run-on sentence and you're looking at it. You can read it like twice over, you can read bits of it and kind of reconstruct the sentence in your head, and you can extract meaning from it. If you're listening to it, you can't kind of skip back to the start of the sentence and middle of the sentence and the end of the sentence and try and figure out what it means. So by the end of the sentence, you're totally confused because it wasn't properly edited, it wasn't really properly thought through. So it is really important to have coherent and consistent writing. The best case example for this is just go and buy a 99-cent book from Amazon, ideally something that doesn't have a high rating. Use your screen reader or an EPUB reader on your phone, just listen to it, and you won't be able to figure out what's going on in the book. Correct semantic structure is important. So heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4. Not heading 1, heading 4, heading 3, heading 1, because it looks good on paper. All right? The structure is important because structure is what helps you navigate the document. Alternative text for figures is important. And it should be meaningful alternative text, not it's a picture. Ooh, great, I know it's a picture. Or it's a chart. Proper identification of language. This is something we forget, because when you get a book, when you open a book, if you are an English reader or a French reader, you know it's English or a French book you've read, and you know the language you speak, you can read it. But when the same book is opened by a screen reader, the screen reader needs to know what language to interpret it in. If you haven't told explicitly this is in French, it's used in the Latin alphabet, so the screen could say, this is in English, and it'll start using English dictionary, and it's going to sound really strange. Or German, or any of the Latin languages. So make sure proper identification language. It's not a huge thing, it's something very easy to miss, but if you do that, it is going to make life a lot easier further down the line. Resizable text obviously doesn't work in paper, at least not yet. But digitally, yes, resizable text is great. I'm actually finding this myself. We were having a discussion with my colleagues yesterday. We went to a restaurant. I was having trouble reading the menu as I'm getting a bit older. But with the Kindle, I've noticed that I've been setting my font size higher and higher and higher. And that's great. Proper color contrast is important, as in so many times I see, like a lighter blue with a yellow text on top of it, menu, restaurant menu, and you're literally going there going, and I would not consider myself visually impaired, but if you can't read it, color contrast is important. Headings, using a heading to outline content is useful, very, very, very useful, because it'll help you navigate through that. List tables, if you're providing complex information in tables, make sure the tables are structured properly. Also make sure your tables are not set up as images in the output, because you want to get that perfect tint of purple in the table, and you can't do that in HTML. You make an image out of it, well, now you can't read it. So make sure your tables follow, especially complex tables, they are actual tables that can be navigated. Print is still one of the most popular and easily distributable formats. It's probably, from a technical point of view, it's not a very accessible format. But from being able to deliver it, it is a very accessible format. You can deliver it anywhere, regardless of technology sophistication. You can print it, deliver it to the middle of nowhere, there is no power, either in a disaster zone or somewhere that's very remote, and that makes that information accessible. So don't ignore print. There is a very good publication from the RNIB called See It Right. And by the way, all of these things I'm talking about, there's a list of, I suppose, references or further material out the back. When you get the slide pack, there's URLs for all of these. And that actually, it's a good book. It's a brilliant book for designing for accessibility, print design. Some of the things it covers, and this is by no means extensive, use high contrast colors for text and background. Print is most readable in black and white. I know sometimes we'd like to have some color in there to differentiate ourselves, but black and white is best. More black there is in the text, less black there is or color there is in the background, the better it is to read. Keep your text large. Avoid complicated decorative fonts. Screen readers probably wouldn't care about decorative fonts, but if you're trying to read it and you have low vision, decorative fonts make it very difficult to read what's going on. Use matte, non-glossy finishes. It cuts down on glare, again, for people who have low vision. There's a lot more recommendations on that publication. I'm not going to go into any more of that because of time. HTML. So HTML, especially if it's compliant to WCAG, that's the acronym for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG 2.0, developed by the Worldwide Web Consortium. It's commonly accepted as the standard for accessibility. There's 3 levels of conformance. There's A, AA, and AAA. And depending on how you prepare content, what you do with it, you certify to one of these levels. Obviously, A is good, AA is better, AAA is the best. Now, you don't have to say everything has to be AAA, and I'll cover that in a minute. And conformance to the standard is based on 4 principles. Is it perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust? And what do I mean by that? Perceivable. You need to provide alternative text for non-text content. So if you have images, charts, you need to provide alternative text for that. And if you are a publisher, like most publishers we work with, production is not the right stage to add alt text. Alt text should really be added by the originator of the content. The person who put that chart there or that image there should be able to say, this is why I put that image there. By the time it's, if an editor is trying to add that, they are trying to now understand what the author meant when they placed it. So it's always important, I try and get the alt text as early in the process as possible. And it's also going to make life a lot easier for that person because they will know exactly why that is. They don't have to guess because they're the ones who put the content there in the first place. Provide captions and alternatives to multimedia. Create content that can be presented in different ways. So if you have a beautiful infographic, which is great if you are fully sighted, but maybe create an alternative of that for people who are either partially sighted or blind, so they can get the same information. Make users easy to see or hear content. Now, you go into websites, and I had an example, but I didn't want to show it. They had some text. Some of it was free-flowing text, followed by an image that they had embedded because they want a certain look for the next chunk of text, and then the rest of the text. So screen reader wouldn't be able to read that image. It looked good, but it was totally useless if you're trying to use a screen reader on it. So make sure whatever you're doing, it makes things accessible. As in, I'd like to give a shout out to Shanna, who's out the back. She has been doing this for our website for the last year, I think, and we are almost at AAA. I think there's still bits that are not there, and it is a lot more difficult than you think, especially if you're using kind of an off-the-shelf content management system and an off-the-shelf theme that really wasn't accessible when they built it, and you're kind of trying to wedge this in. It is a bit of work, but it's definitely worthwhile. Talking about operable, make sure it can be used using a keyboard. And I'm not sure if Caleb's in the room or Ben. So they are working on making our server accessible. I think that's one of the big pushes. Because accessibility is important for us. We're putting that through all our products. And we are finding that certain things on our server cannot be accessed using a keyboard. You have to have a mouse. So when you find that, we should, we're fixing that. Give users enough time to interact with it. Don't start bugging them saying, oh, you've been looking at this for 10 minutes or 3 minutes. You need to move on, or I'm going to time you out. Don't use content that could induce seizures. I think a lot of people know this. I know HTML still has the flash tag. Don't use it. But again, there's a lot of material on this from the W3C. And help users navigate the content. Make sure there's easy navigation built into the, your content you're building. Make the text readable and understandable. Goes without saying. Make the content appear in predictable ways. As in, there's a bank in Australia, and actually it's a bank I bank with, which makes it even more annoying. So their idea is, when you log in, you type in your internet banking number, and to do the password, they have this keyboard that randomly jumps around the screen, so that Keylogger can't capture what you're typing. But there is me randomly trying to punch the button. It is the most frustrating product, and it's been featured in a number of case studies on accessibility, so you can look it up. But it is definitely not predictable, and sometimes you feel like you need to especially if you're trying to do that on a phone or a tactile device, as it's jumping around, it's really annoying. With the mouse, you can kind of try and follow it. Help users correct mistakes or avoid mistakes. If you're walking them through a path, make sure they have a way back. If they press the wrong button, because sometimes if they have movement impairment. They might be moving up and down. Think about something like Parkinson's. And very importantly, maximize compatibility with current tools. If you build this great website and it only works in Chrome and everybody knows Chrome's the best product and who else, why would you not use Chrome? It's free. Don't do that. Make sure people can use it, all the other platforms, as in this is one of my pet bugbears, and so make sure when you create something it is accessible that way. DAISY. Anybody here who know what DAISY is? So DAISY stands for Digital Accessible Information System. It's a talking book format. It's fairly oldish now. It's about 15 years old. But it's developed and maintained by the International DAISY Consortium. It's an ISO standard. It doesn't preserve layout. It is not about layout. It is about presenting an audio book or voice, text voice. Still very widely used. Especially in places like Australia, in the UK, you will still find a lot of older people with DAISY readers who are getting their newspaper as a DAISY file every day. They're getting their magazines as a DAISY file every day. In Australia, the Vision Australia, the organization, still converts a newspaper into DAISY every single day. And the DAISY file is then distributed to their members. So DAISY is very widely used. It's kind of trending away from it because DAISY version 4 and EPUB version 3 is the same file format. So technically, any EPUB 3 reading device should be able to read a DAISY file. I mean technically because there are plenty of devices in the market that can't do that. Definitely the top-end devices can, but there are a lot of devices out there that claim to be EPUB 3 device, and you try and load a DAISY file, the DAISY information in there, and either it fails or it just totally ignores it. So it's a little bit of a way to go there. There's EPUB, kind of peaked about 2 years ago and kind of plateaued since then, so it's no longer the cool kid on the block. It's a zip file, so it's a zip file of content. It's like a small website. Contains HTML files, CSS style sheets, screen readable. If you make a VCAG2 EPUB file with the VCAG2 guidelines, you more or less end up with a very accessible file. Lots of devices can read this, so you can distribute it, read it. It's a widely adopted format, and EPUB readers are everywhere. Accessibility is built into the standard. It's up to you as a publisher if you want to use that. And for example, we saw a textbook. One of our customers sent us this textbook. It was accessible, but the alt text in all of those images just said alt text. So it was technically conformant, but it wasn't very usable. So if you are going to make something accessible in EPUB 3, try to make it genuinely accessible, not just pass conformance testing. Because it's very easy to pass conformance testing without making something accessible. As I mentioned earlier, EPUB and DAISY standards have harmonized, but many EPUB readers lack the feature compatibility to actually make it accessible for EPUB 3. PDF. So this, who here still distributes PDF files? Yeah, quite a few. And to be honest, the market for PDF is going back up again because, funnily enough, there's been a lot of research done in the last few years that talk about a page as a kind of a representation of information is very important, which you don't get in an EPUB or a website. A page is something that you can navigate through. It's a great navigational device. And because of this, PDF's kind of hanging on and kind of gaining some ground again. You can make a PDF document readable. Even if it's multi-column and beautifully designed, you can still give it a reading order and a tag order so screen readers know how to follow through it. I think my colleague Guy is going to cover all of that later, or some of that later. If you create the PDF correctly, you can make it fairly accessible. There's actually ISO standard on this, wonderful ISO. It's ISO 14289, 2014, and it's got a really long title, which I'm not going to read out. But that's the standard that covers PDF UA. And the good thing about PDF UA is you can create a single PDF file, you can put it on your website, people can download it and print it, and if they're not visually impaired, that's all they need to do, or they can download it and look at it. If you are visually impaired, you can download it, put it into a screen reader, and it serves that dual purpose. of being accessible file and normal printed file. Now, if you can reuse that same content and create a DAISY file or EPUB file, you'll be more accessible. But if you only have the budget to create a PDF, try making an accessible PDF. Yeah, just touching on some of the standards again. There's WCAG 1, which came out in 1999, superseded by WCAG 2 in 2008. There's the Section 508. So how many people are here from the US, by the way? I see a few faces, yeah. In the US, you hear about, are you Section 508 compliant? If you sell to the government, you have to be Section 508 compliant. If you do certain things, you have to be Section 508 compliant. So it's actually a set of regulations and a set of standards. I mentioned the ISO, the PDF UF already. Large print and clear print guidelines from the RNIB. These are not formal standards, but it is something you should be looking at following. I talked about DAISY, and I've talked about EPUB 3. So I just want to take a little segue at this point. I mean, I've given a few cases where accessible is not always usable. And you can, as I keep saying, you can pass conformance testing, and you can make a really good attempt at it, but it might not be usable. I'll give you an example. So this is our office. There's Ben, who's the head of engineering. In the office, we play a game called Carcassonne, a board game. That's the board game. And we play it, I don't know, about once a day. Whoever's in the office joins in. And we keep track of our scores. And generally, Shanna wins all the time. So, but this is the scores from last year. That's on a whiteboard. Now, I've decided to put that onto a table. So this is the results from March, April, and May last year. Fairly easy to follow. You know who won. The person who wins the month brings a cake in for the end of the month or the start of the next month. So you know who brings the cake in and all of that. It's really obvious. And it's done by percentage because not everybody's in the office all the time. Now, you're visually impaired. You want to find out how many games Michael won in May. So what you need to do is your screen reader is going to be starting at the top left-hand corner. It's going to be reading player, win, played, win percentage. You can say, no, I want to go navigate by player, so you're going to click your button when it says player. It's going to say March, not interested, click again, Ben, not interested. You're going to click, 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 until you get all the way down to here, and you're going to click along to the side. That's a long list to work through to get there. If you're not visually impaired, you know exactly what subheading to go to. The challenge is tables have no concept of subheadings. The navigation on tables do not follow subheadings. We know that's a subheading, but for a screen reader, that's just something with a blue background and a bold text. So using subheadings in tables will cause this problem. And this is not a big table. This is a fairly relatively small table. How can we fix that? Well, you can split that into 3 tables. That's one way. So there's a table for each month. Or you can do something like this, where we can add another column, merge the column down. So this one, you start the screen reader, it says month, yes, click. March, no. April, no. May, yes. Next one, Shanna, no, and you navigate to Michael. So I counted this out earlier. It's 8 clicks here, 19 clicks in the previous one. So you save half the effort for a screen reader by adding that extra column. So there's a lot of things you can do to your content to make it more accessible and more readable. So what you should do next? You need to decide on your level of conformance. Make sure it's realistic. Look around your organization. You all have a day job. So if you should be looking at accessibility. Decide what you're going to do. Decide how much you're going to do it. And set a realistic set of goals. One single format cannot meet all your accessibility needs. Try and do a few formats, if you can. Consider producing as many outputs or many different types of outputs as long as cost is feasible. Ensure the content is accessible and usable. Not just accessible, because it's very easy to pass the accessibility checker and get the tick. But if you do that and you claim something to be accessible, somebody's going to end up in your content and get totally lost, and your brand is just going to suffer. Some accessibility is better than no. I've heard this so many times from research we've conducted, where people are saying, yes, you haven't reached AAA, but this is so much better than what it was last week when it was a scanned PDF or screen reader non-friendly PDF. So definitely some accessibility is better than none. So thank you. This is the further reading. So at this point, I will ask if you have any questions.
Hi. Just being slightly perverse and awkward, you can sometimes have a tension between different accessibility requirements. So you're saying that for blind or partially sighted readers, you want maximal contrast, black and white. Mm-hmm. If you have dyslexic readers, you do not want maximal contrast. You want high but non-maximal. How do you kind of balance those?
So I would create two different files. That's what I would do. I would create one that has a high contrast file and one that doesn't have high contrast. If you're in a digital environment, if you're on a website, have two different CSSs where they can switch. For print, I would actually create two different PDF files. One with one set of fonts and style sheets, either in InDesign. In our case, you would use two different templates in Typefi. That's how we would solve it. If you don't have Typefi, use lay it out, go in there, change your paragraph style settings and your character style settings, and just get different look. That's the ideal way to solve it. If you don't have the budget for either of them, try and find a middle ground. Again, don't choose like light blue on yellow. Just find a ground that'll work for both, but ideally create two specialist ones. All right. Thank you very much.